I'll start off then and just welcome you all to this session of CoSS Essentials. And this one is about the technology enhanced learning, the TEL Hub. TEL Hub was created, and again, I don't know if you all know who I am. I'll just start off by saying who I am and what my role is today. I'm Graham Timmins, I'm the Education Director for the College of Social Sciences, and I am technically the MC today, aren't I? So I'll be introducing people, and at the end of it, if we have any we'll have a QA session at the end to anything that we feel will be worthwhile discussing in more detail. Then we'll have an opportunity then to talk about things in more detail. But the purpose of today's session is to talk about the use of technology enhanced learning as an increasingly core activity within the college and our general learning and teaching support. The TEL Hub was created in early 2016, and the purpose of it was to help develop and support a digital first strategy for the college, linked into a wider university initiative. And when I mention TEL, and all things technology enhanced learning, often to colleagues, the response that I get back straight away is, oh, distance learning. Well, yeah, in some ways it is about distance learning, but it's as equally about the campus experience. And indeed, the gradual erosion between those two modes of delivery, what's happening on campus and what's happening in terms of our non-campus distance learning based activities. And I was recently asked to contribute to the big conversation. And if Kathy Armour hasn't already banged on your door, no doubt at some point soon she will, and ask you to make a contribution to the big conversation website. And when I was asked to make an impromptu contribution, my big idea, if you like, was that what I think we're going to see over the next 10 years, because the big conversation is about how we're going to see higher education changing between now and 2026. I think one of the real challenges that we face is how the physical and the virtual learning environments interact, and how they are going to change, how we use technology enhanced learning, but also what those changes mean for the physical teaching environment. In many ways, we started with an assumption that the virtual environment supports the physical environment. But increasingly, we might find that the physical environment supports the virtual environment. So I think there's a lot that's happening that's of interest here in terms of what a digital first strategy looks like, where it's taking us in terms of changes in higher education. What's driving this? What lies behind it? And I think there are three main drivers. I think the first driver is just technology. We now have the capacity to innovate in ways that we didn't have before. And the story that I often trot out is I remember starting off with my PhD, which was about German unification, and I had to get some EU documents. And I tell this story about having to type out. I actually typed my PhD thesis on a ribbon typewriter, typing out a letter to the European Commission, putting it in an envelope, putting a stamp on it, asking for some key documents, sending it off to Brussels, and waiting 2 or 3 weeks for a response. And then, of course, it was wrong, so I had to send it again. It took about 2 months to actually get the primary source documents that I was looking for my research. Just a small anecdote of how technology is helping us as researchers. That stuff that would in the past take 2 months to get hold of, we can now get hold of in seconds. And the same is happening with the learning and teaching experience, that with the technological changes, there is just more stuff that we can do now with that technology in terms of supporting not just research, but also learning and teaching. The second driver is the teaching excellence framework. And what increasingly we are going to be asked to do is to justify our claims to being excellent. In what sense do we think, we are providing an excellent student experience? And the use of technology-enhanced learning is certainly in one area where we have the resources here at Birmingham, we have the know-how to be truly world excellent in terms of how we make use of these new technological advances. And of course that means that part of the challenge that we face is not just that we've got all these lovely new bells and whistles, but we have the pedagogical underpinnings about how to use them. It's not, it's not just about using these new instruments. We have to know how we're using them, why we're using them, how that enhances the student experience and helps support learning and teaching. And the third driver, I think, is students, Generation Z. And I've never really got to understand exactly what Generation Z means, but I keep being told I should know. It's those students who are coming down the track who'll be arriving at Birmingham in 2026, if not earlier. And how do we match their expectations of how they'll be approaching learning? And I think in many ways we are having to run very quickly now, I think, just to stand still and meet the expectations of many of our current students. And I think that agenda is only going to become more pressing over the next 10 years as to how do we meet the expectations of students coming into this university in terms of how we support their experience whilst at university. So there are a number of three very important drivers there that we're having to come to terms with. And this is a small but I think an important contribution to starting that discussion within the college. So we have 3 speakers today. We'll start off with Kabir Ganguly, who's the college lead for the TEL Hub. He'll be talking about the development gateway and what's this? How to make better use, more effective use of Canvas. Then we have Vicky Burns from SportEx, who's fresh from her triumphs at the Teaching Awards ceremony yesterday evening, and indeed a national award. So I think you're wonderfully placed, I think, to talk about innovative use of TEL for assessment purposes. And I think there's a lot there where we need to focus on. And thirdly, then we have Ian Myatt, who's and I always get Ian's title wrong, and I always apologise to him, and he's always very diplomatic and kind and corrects me and smiles. The University Educational Enterprise Director. Yeah, who will talk about reflections on the developing online portfolio development. So we've got 3, I think, really interesting sessions that we've got put together here. But this is all also about your questions, your contributions. So please stop us and buy one, as we're passing by. Ask the questions that you need to ask as we're talking, and there will be time at the end. I'm hoping this will be a really useful, positive session for us. So thank you once again all for coming. And we'll start off with Kabir.
As Graham said, I'm the TEL Hub lead, so Partnership and Development Manager for Technology Enhanced Learning, which pretty much relates to anything Canvas-based, e-learning based. So what I wanted to do is talk about the gateway, the Professional Development Gateway, which you would have all seen emails about, over the past couple of months, bombarded with emails about training and have a look at the gateway, how you can enhance and make the most of Canvas. So what I really wanted to do was to talk to you about the gateway, why it was produced, but also to let you know that the gateway is more than just that website where you can go on to access information. It is about the CoSS team, so how that team is there to support you to develop your Canvas area, your virtual learning environment, but also develop your programs and your courses. So it's more than just a static resource. It's continually developed. There are new courses in the pipeline. Resource lists should be ready around the new year time. But what I'll also talk to you about is almost some of the research that's gone into what students expect from Canvas, whether that be the support they need, the welfare support, but also the support in the learning environment, into their learning experience and their whole lifestyle at university, and how technology enhanced learning can support the student experience. So what I'd like to do, obviously, is talk about our current students, but also, as Graham's mentioned, year 2026 obviously feels like a long way off, but I think what the Gateway enables us to do is embed good practice for our future students, but also understanding that whatever we're doing now relates to our on-campus students, but how adopting these technologies can help us with our distance students, our blended students as well. So really what I talk about with making the most of Canvas is using digital kind of assets, if you like. So we're making digitally rich content within Canvas rather than it being the repository. So I'm hoping what the Gateway does is enable you to create, tell you how to create a Canvas module in a way that a student will interact and engage with your teaching materials. So it's very much a digital approach to teaching. Okay, so as Graham says, the pedagogy drives this. It's not the technology. I don't want anybody to think technology enhanced learning or the professional development gateway is far beyond their reach. It's not an aspiration that isn't beyond us. This is us taking Canvas and the tools within Canvas and running with them, because I think with the Gateway you will find they are very, very easy to use. So when I talk about digitally rich tools, I found an article, I don't know if anyone follows on their Twitter and Facebook feeds, the Daily Mash. Not the Daily Mail, it's the Daily Mash. So basically I saw this and I thought, whenever I'm talking to academics about creating digitally rich material, they always scratch their chins and go, well, what do you mean by digital, digitally rich? You know, so here it says media workers talking about digital do not have the slightest clue what it is. You know, and that is pretty much it. You know, so what I want to do is define what we mean by digitally rich today and what the Gateway will do. I won't read it all, but you know, there's a few rude words in there. No one could explain to us what digital means. It's almost as if people who work in the media talk a load of, and use your imagination. Right, we're not trying to talk a load of you know what. We are actually saying, when we refer to digitally rich content for the learning experience, we're talking about Canvas and its associated tools, and that's what the Gateway does. Okay? So the future isn't digital. We are already digital. We are already using Canvas, and in some areas there are pockets of great practice. And 32% of students make their decision on university by technology used in teaching. Okay, so what I'm saying there is there will be students looking at our campus at open days thinking, what do you do? How do you teach? How do you deliver a great learning experience? Okay, so how can we make the most of Canvas to deliver that and shout about what we do? And I'm hoping the Gateway will provide us with that. Okay, so this, I didn't want to provide an aspirational shot of somebody in a coffee shop on a MacBook Pro that's so far unrelated, but this is, again, what Graham was talking about. This is my son, a 2-year-old, who is already using digital materials. He doesn't have his own iPad, but he wants to use it, okay? So by the time he comes onto campus, when he's old enough, he will be expecting a gold level service learning experience, okay? So that's where we're coming from with the Gateway. And hopefully the first set of modules within that Gateway, the introduction to Canvas and building a Canvas module, will put us in good stead to actually create that future learning experience. And online marketing in Canvas. Now Danielle Hinton, who's part of this CoSS team, created that module, who will be talking to you about how you can deliver online marketing, make better use of assessment tools within Canvas. There are interactive voting tools, hints and tips in there, but also event capture with Panopto, which I'll focus on very slightly. And the quizzes in Canvas module is there, which I'm hoping you've all had a look. But we can talk in detail about what that offers you and what it offers your students in terms of formative assessment. It enables us to capture or intervene, let's say, if you are producing quizzes within Canvas, we can monitor and track your students, say, well, actually, you're struggling in this area. Let us focus here. Let us focus on another area. But the link was there. If I go back to it, so there's your short URL, birmingham.ac.uk/PDG. Sign up for some of the courses if you haven't done already, but as I say, you would have seen all of my emails around that and the variety of courses. So really, why are we creating that introduction to Canvas? Because essentially, that's the way that we talk to our students, teach our students. It's a learning environment. Let's not forget that. So Google carried out a study. This is the science bit, I guess. 0.05 seconds it takes somebody to form an opinion of a website, of something digital, okay, of a learning environment when they're viewing it on their screen. And this is dependent on many factors, okay, structure, colour, spacing, symmetry, amount of text, and so on. So when we're looking at that, creating that Canvas module, okay, what's going to turn a student off, okay? Is it just going to be a list of PDFs and a repository of your lecture PowerPoints? Possibly. So we need to engage them. So that's what the gateway's doing. It's telling us how to create materials to engage with our students, enhancing their experience. Okay, so the interfaces of Canvas, user interface have the ability to influence the relationship to usability and trust, okay? So one of the things that we did with the induction module, creating the induction module with Julie, who's here, was we actually looked at how students want to work within our learning environment and Canvas, okay? So we actually wanted to go one step further and create something that was engaging. Again, our team and the Gateway can help you essentially create something that's, yes, colourful, and we have stolen this look and this format, but what I want to do is just say to you guys, come and talk to our team, either through a Gateway session or directly to us. The likes of Dee, who's behind the camera, Pravilla and Stuart as well, can help develop our course materials within Canvas. Okay, so Panopto event capture, again, I'm using a non-aspirational image. This is somebody using technology. Okay, let's keep running with that point. So Panopto and event capture, how the Gateway and our team can support that, is we can help set up your Panopto recordings. But what I've always heard from academics at the moment is, well, if I actually use Panopto, people won't come to our lectures. That's not the case, and there is research to say that higher academic achievement and increased engagement is seen through the use of Panopto. Okay, absenteeism has dropped from 10% to 1% in a study done by the Bill Gates Foundation. Okay, so you're seeing the opposite effect. Students are wanting to use Panopto, hence why we have the Gateway there teaching you how to use Panopto. So Dee has been working with James Gormley to work with Chris Lonsdale to create some of these flipped classroom type sessions. Okay, that was on the back of the Gateway. He was like, look, these courses are great. Now, what's the next step? So what we've done here is create some bite-sized learning materials here with Chris as short lecture summaries. What that has allowed him to do is to kind of almost create a different type of lecture and seminar. People are coming to his lectures for discussion, collaborative learning, which is a question on this year's NSS. Does your university or class allow for that? Now, hopefully, if we can roll more of this out and you've been on the Gateway courses and you feel you are comfortable with the use of Panopto, go ahead and try it. But we are here to support you with it. And Chris Lonsdale, hopefully, if we have another conversation, you will see that his students are benefiting from it. Okay, so the Canvas survey 2016 has said that 91% of their students strongly agreed that Canvas was useful for their studies, okay? So hence why there is a big button on the Gateway saying making the most of Canvas. Students want to use Canvas. They're not coming to us saying we want to use different types, different tools, different apps. They want everything housed within one place. And 57%, is that 57? Yes, 57% found Panopto useful. Okay, but 24% students said they didn't have access to recordings. So that's something the Gateway is trying to address. Can we enable Panopto for the mass market, if you like, all students on campus?
Students on campus?
I mean students that learn with the University of Birmingham, distance learners. I am aware that we have a full breadth of students. Okay, that was a minor slip of the tongue. I apologise, Liz. Okay, so the Canvas survey. So No, believe me, it was just a little slip. So we have a quote there from the students. They want everything accessible in one place, and this is from the Canvas student survey. But most lecturers have no idea how to use it properly, leading to just a list of lecture handouts, nothing more. So again, the Gateway is hoping to address all of this to, help address their concerns. That's too small, but I can also, the students want to complete quizzes, okay? This is, again, student feedback, wanting to use quizzes to test their learning, to actually have that interaction with the academic, the lecturer, to say, okay, this is where I'm struggling. So what I'm not going to do today is teach you how to embed these quizzes in your lectures, because that's what the courses are there for, but please come to us and we will help with that. And it gives me notifications of assignments that are due a week in advance. Okay, what the Gateway is looking to address is how you can set up these notifications, signpost students to support materials that they need. So again, what I'd suggest is really access this Gateway for future courses that we'll be in touch with. Okay, so that in a nutshell, a very quick whistle-stop tour about what the Gateway can offer and what it does for the student experience.
Thank you.
Okay, so hi everybody. Thank you very much for having me today. As you heard, I'm from the School of Sport, Exercise and Rehabilitation Sciences, and I'm the Teaching Academy lead for the College of Life and Environmental Sciences. And one of my interests is innovative assessments and how we can change our assessments. And it might not seem from the title to be immediately technologically focused, but actually if you think about how we change our teaching delivery, and we're trying to incorporate all these different approaches to teaching delivery using technology, and then you think about the ways that we typically assess our students, and there are examples of more innovative approaches all across campus already, but typically assess our students, we're thinking essays, traditional exams, short answer questions, multiple choice, etc., and these things, they're not using technology either. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about today is why we might want to use different types of assessment in terms of how we're developing our students. But I've specifically selected out ones where I think we can use technology to enable that to happen. And I think the first thing to think about and take us right back to the basic principles is why we assess in the first place. And usually we think about it in terms of measuring achievement. We need to know by the end of the module how much of what we've been working on do they now know, what are they now able to do, how can we compare them to each other. How can we give them a score that we can use for something? And we have this focus on summative assessment. And then we also have these more formative assessments, which are more focused on how we're engendering learning in our students, how we can help them to develop the skills and the knowledge they need. This is taken from Bood and Felshkov. I actually don't like the dichotomy between these. I think if you design summative assessments well, they should also engender learning in the process of doing the activity. We know that students engage with summative assessments more enthusiastically, put more hours into them than formative assessment. So I don't think it should be quite dichotomized out like this. But these are two of the things that people focus on. One that we often don't focus on is thinking about how our assessments can enable students to develop lifelong learning habits. That however they're learning while they're here at university is probably how they're going to go on and learn in the future. And often we don't put those sorts of parts in it. The other thing that I want to add to this, though, is we know research done by Graham Gibbs and others shows that assessment drives what students spend their time doing more than anything else. If they know there's marks attached to it, that's where lots and lots of effort goes. And what that means is we actually have a huge amount of control over what they spend their time doing. By choosing assessments that encourage them to engage in the right sorts of learning behaviours, we can make sure that they spend lots of time doing that. However, a lot of the assessments we use, and I'm guilty of this still myself, I teach anatomy to a first year class, and whilst we have some short answers where they're more discursive, I do assess a lot of it by MCQ. And as much as I tell the student, I really want you to focus on the understanding the principles. If you understand the principles, you can work out the questions, but they still get bogged down in memorization. How are you spending your time? I've made flashcards. It's amazing. Flashcards, I can do all of these things. Okay, put your hand on that muscle. I don't know. They can describe its perfect anatomical location in words, because they've got it off their flashcards. And if I ask them to point to it, they can't do it. And so we have a very large class, and we're still working out ways around that. But developing their assessment so they spend time doing the more problem solving, working with others, actually having to think creatively about their learning, means that you can really guide their activities. How many of you are familiar with the Birmingham graduate attributes? Some, but not many. Yes, there's some people, if they hadn't put their hands up, I would have been quite upset. Yes, no, this is part of the education strategy that was launched in the 2015 to 20, whenever it is, thing. It's actually not received an enormous amount of attention, to be honest. I believe with our new PVC, it's being sort of re-looked at and might get tweaked. But the idea that we have attributes, characteristics of our students, when they leave us, we want them to have, isn't going to go anywhere. The slight wordings might change on these, they might tweak. And you can see, we often focus towards the top, subject specialists. We're increasingly having opportunities, widening horizons and so on, for them to be specialists outside of their main areas. But many of these other aspects, being enterprising, problem solving, being resilient leaders, we might hope that they have these by the time they leave university, but I would question how much we build them into assessments to give them opportunities not only to develop these, but also to demonstrate that they have developed these. So many of the things I'm talking about today have opportunities for the students to develop some of these broader attributes, as well as their subject-specific knowledge. And I say as well as because I truly believe that with all of these, it has to be embedded within the disciplinary context. I'm not a fan of the learn some disciplinary stuff over here, assess it in traditional ways, and then do some transferable skills stuff separately. I think that our students, when they graduate, need to be able to link their transferable broader skills with their disciplinary subject-specific knowledge and apply that to issues that are of societal concern. And that's the sorts of things that I'm going to be talking about today. So, one of the things, when we're designing assessments, designing modules in fact, we often start out with, well, what's the content of this module going to be? What stuff are they going to learn? We'll have some learning outcomes. What content are we going to deliver? And then at some stage down the line, we think about, okay, how can we assess that they now know that stuff? And that comes afterwards. This argument suggests that actually you start with what do we want our students to be able to do at the end, whether it's the end of their degree, the end of their year, the end of their module, whatever it is. What do we want them to be able to do? Therefore, how can we assess that they can do that thing? And then work your content from there. So picking the assessment first, and then working, okay, what teaching support are they going to need? What content input are they going to need? What skill development are they going to need? What supervision are they going to need in order to be able to do that by the end of it? So I'm suggesting that we actually start by designing assessments as the first thing we do when we design modules. And what I'm going to do now is give you a whistle-stop tour through a whole load of different options. Some of these are things you may have thought about already. Some of these will be things that you'll go, oh, we probably don't do that in COS, but I'm going to explain to you how you could. So it's things taken from more science subjects that you could use in COS. And so hopefully it may be that quite a few of them you think, oh, I couldn't do that in my module, but maybe somebody I know could do that in theirs. Or you might think, oh, those ones will work for me. So it's sort of a whole bunch of different ideas. And lots of them are taken, I'm going to put my plug in now, lots of them are taken from my book, which is called 53 Interesting Ways to Assess Your Students, available on Amazon. I'm sure if you spoke to Santa now, he could get it in your stocking by Christmas. It's very cheap, and it's a similar idea that it's lots of very short chapters about different types of assessment that you can then, once you've found ones you like, you can then explore further. So starting out with background reading, how we get our students to read broadly. And often we say that essays is the way that we assess these sorts of things. Can they get a good hold of the literature, understand the purpose of it? But we all know that that's time-consuming for students, it's time-consuming for staff, and it doesn't necessarily get to the crux of what we're interested in. So another option is annotated bibliographies. Rather than getting them to write the full essay first time, getting them to do an annotated bibliography. So you tell them they've got to come up with 10 references, 15 references, whatever it is, that they think are the crucial ones to answer the question that you've given them, and do a couple of sentences of each one, why they think it's a good paper, why it's helping this question, and then they have a conclusion at the end of it. And it can be part of an iterative thing. You could imagine having a thing where one module in first semester, they do an annotated bibliography, and then a second module on a different topic, doesn't really matter. Then they'd maybe do a full essay plan or a full essay itself, but they're building on it. Tanya Sobko, who's from University of Hong Kong, does this as an online version. So she gets the students to actually upload into a sort of Google Docs type thing the PDFs of the articles that they have and put in there. So you click on them and you get the different bits of text about them, why they're there. And that's really good from several points of view. Encourages really positive learning behaviours for the students, because she encourages them to then do this in future for other types of work. Even if it's not assessed, it's a great way to start out. It ensures that your student has actually accessed the reference and they haven't just read the abstract online. They have to, because they've got to put the full paper on there, you can be sure that they have actually got the full paper, which is always handy. And you can work out ways that students can collaborate on them, give them different aspects of a topic. They've got to come up with 10 references for that part, and they've got 10 references for that part, and then they can share their references with each other. Other options we have, so in the sciences we often use posters at conferences summarising studies that we've done, this sort of thing, but actually you can get students to do that to summarise other people's studies as well. It doesn't have to just be research projects that they've done. One of the things that I've done with students is ask them to pick a paper that's been done in the last year that is relevant to the module and high quality, get them to summarise it in a poster format. And again, it gives you opportunities for peer learning and community development. You could see them leading towards, at the end of the module, having a poster fair that shows all the research that's been done. If you want to really demonstrate our research-led teaching environment, you could ask them to select a paper that's been published by people in your department over the last 5 years or something like that, and have a big thing at the end of the module where everybody, everyone has to pick a different paper, everyone shares, you find a whole load of posters that are advertising the studies that you have completed and published over the years. So it gets the students to think creatively, and you can actually, depending on what you want to develop, skills you want to develop, if you want to develop the actual technical skills, you make them start from a blank PowerPoint slide and off they go. Or if you want to develop the actual summarization skills, you give them a model one. They've got room for one graph, they've got room for 4 bullet points here, and they've got to pick what are the most important bits to get out. So you can tweak it to fit your learning outcomes. Doing study proposals, so getting them to look at a particular area of your research and decide what is the next study that needs doing. And what it does is it changes the way they read. Often when they read in essays, they sort of read around the topic. As long as I've sort of read enough stuff sort of around the topic, I'll be okay. What this does is it makes them look for the edge of the topic. Okay, we know this, but we don't know that yet. This bit's been well explored, but it's never been done like that before. And it gets them to find those gaps and then come up with ways that they could address those things. And you could see this across a whole variety, from laboratory studies all the way through to ethnographies or whatever. They could have detailed case for support. You could get them to actually budget for it, get them to do timetables of when they would do different things. You could see them using project management software for this, actually producing Gantt charts to demonstrate what would be done at what time points, that sort of thing. They could spell out what different types, encourage them to do interdisciplinary projects. What if they bringing this expertise, what other types of experts would they need to make this project happen? And you can get them to peer review each other's then, really pick them apart so that they actually take on review panel jobs for each other's. You could even perhaps assess them on their review of each other's, as well as get them to write a short review, as well as on the project proposal itself. But you could see again that technology could make this more applied using the types of techniques that they might use in the future. You could also apply this, one of my big interests is actually applying these to real issues. So Jess Piket's doing this in Geese at the moment. There are other examples where you get a community organisation to come in and present a challenge or an issue that they're having at the moment. In fact, those of you at the TA Awards last night, you heard from Peter Lee, who has been doing some of this as well. So they come in, present a particular real issue, I hate the real world thing, but you know what I mean, on an issue that they're actually experiencing, and the students have to propose a solution or propose a project to explore it further. And you could see then them producing some sort of more of a glossy brochure to give back to the organisation with their findings and recommendations, for example. That's something we're working up. We're working on a civic engagement dissertation module in SportEx at the moment, where instead of doing a pure research project, they do a research project in collaboration with a community organisation that's focused on one of their specific issues. And instead of being assessed by an academic paper, they're going to be assessed as the main part of it by a sort of a glossy report. So part of it will be producing something that looks professional, represents things graphically as well as in text and so on. Lab notebooks. This is one of the ones that might sound like it's a very sort of lab science-based thing, but this is basically when you're an active scientist, you keep your lab book so that you have a record of exactly what you've done through the process of your research, and these are kind of held as Bibles by biochemistry type scientists. But actually, the idea is that by getting students to do them, they experience what it's like to be a real laboratory worker. But actually, that process of research and keeping those sorts of field note diaries is really important across all different types of research. So whether you're doing social sciences research out in the field, whether you're doing desk-based research, following through what is that process they've gone through from being set to the piece of work until they handed it in. So there's lots of different ways that could open up what the students are actually spending their time doing, getting them to think about the process as well as their actual output. Gives opportunities for formative feedback. Again, you can have the community feel by having exhibitions of these, getting students to see other people's diaries so they can see, oh, well, actually, gosh, you did all that stuff. I didn't do any of that stuff. And being able to learn from each other's. And that then leads into the idea of learning archives. And again, this is something where I'm not sure to what extent it's possible in Canvas at the moment, but I think it's something that we really would like to be able to do more of in Canvas. And this is keeping a record of how their learning has progressed through time, getting them to actually be able to go back and see how they've done in some pieces of work, what feedback they got for it, and how that has changed over the different pieces of feedback. But we can design assessments to encourage this. So as an example, what you could do is ask them the same question at the beginning or end of first year and ask them the same thing again at the end of second year and see how differently they answer it next time. So you give them a very broad, what are the causes of youth homelessness or whatever's relevant in your discipline. See what they say when they first arrive, having had very little input, see what they say at the end of first year, see what they say at the end of second year. Because one of the things, getting students to actually understand their learning is one of the important things. Often, once you understand something, you forget how little you knew before, and so you don't see yourself as having progressed so much. Giving them different resources, giving them an artifact, giving them a piece of artwork, for example, getting them to talk about, tell me what you can about this artwork, relating it to history, relating it to the art at the time, whatever. And then you can build this into into tutorials, reviewing how they've changed. Also thinking about public communication. We know with the impact agenda in REF, the increasing pressure, encouragement to share our research more broadly, some of this has got through into the undergraduate curriculum, but not an enormous amount. And actually, the undergraduates now that are going to go on and stay in academia are going to be required to do this throughout their careers, writing lay summaries, engaging with the public, etc. And those who aren't going to go into academia, the majority of them are going, whatever they do, are going to be in situations where they have more expertise than the people that they're working with or working for, and they need to be able to explain their expertise in a way that's accessible to the people that they're working with. So I think whatever the students go on and do, these are really important skills to be developing. And again, there's a variety of ways you can use technology to do this. You can get the students to write blog pieces about a particular piece of research that's just come out or a particular controversial question. If you do a subject where there's things that in the news that are relevant, picking an article, getting the students to do blog responses to it, things like that. Doing videos. So I was in FameLab, which is a public speaking competition, public science communication competition, and 3 minutes to describe a particular aspect of science. You could do it across any different topic. It's a little bit like the 3-minute thesis idea. If you want to Google it, you can see me falling flat on my face, pretty much literally on a theatre in front of about 300 people live streaming on the internet. And there's a record. So do Google it if you're bored and feeling bad about yourself at any stage before Christmas. But what that did for me in my assessments is I had this good plan that I was going to get my students to do these FameLab presentations, and basically you have 3 minutes, and I forgot my words partway through, and I had like 10 seconds of standing there like an absolute muppet, thinking if I don't start talking soon, I'm going to run out of time, and it's going to be. It was not one of my prouder moments. But what it made me reflect on was what I was going to ask my students to do. And so what I do now is I get them to submit a 3-minute recorded as live video. So they still have to do it as a single chunk, unless there's learning needs. So I had a guy with a stutter, he did it as bits so that he didn't have to do the full 3 minutes. But generally, they have to do it as live, but they get to submit their best version. And that's because I was thinking about what do I really want them to be able to do? Do I want them to be able to perform on the day, on the moment, pull it out the bag? Or do I want them to think creatively about how they can describe academic study and make it interesting and understandable? And I decided that was much more important than whether they could perform on the day. So I do it as a short video. Julie and others do have more extensive videos where they're actually having to create more documentary style videos, which develops a whole different range of skills, which is fantastic. Lee Gregory does podcasts, so he does interviews with the students that he records as though it was a podcast. So it's like a Viva, but it's set up as this sort of informal, you've got to explain it in a non-academic kind of way. I mentioned some cautions there. Partly you do have to have some degree of comfort yourself with these things. So if you've had experience of them yourself, that does make it easier. You have to be very clear with the students up front what you're going to do with what they produce. I've been a bit soft on this so far. Every year so far, I've said that if students want, we'll put them on YouTube. And then a few students come forward and we put them up, but not very many. At some stage, I'm going to bite the bullet and say that the expectation is that these will go, unless you make a case as to why that shouldn't be the case, that these will go on YouTube, and that you need to design them in such a way. If you don't want your face to be on YouTube, you need to design your video in such a way that you don't have to be on it, for example. So I need to bite the bullet with that. But the most important thing is being clear up front what it's being used for. The other thing is being very clear about the purpose of it. Students can be surprised, considering how much technological stuff they're exposed to, they can be surprisingly conservative. And I've had students saying, I'm not here to learn to be a journalist. That's not what I came to do. I'm not here to learn to be a blogger. And so you have to be very explicit as to why this is part of their theoretical learning, why it's a really important skill for them to develop, why it's related directly to their discipline. Thinking about reflections, the more we introduce placements, projects, these sorts of things, the more we need to get students to be reflecting on their own performance, what they've done well, what they've done less well. So I like the ones where they have only a certain number of them count. It gives students an opportunity to experiment a little bit, to try different ways of doing it, and if they get less good feedback on that, then they don't need to use it. One other thing I was expecting to pop up there but didn't pop up in between. A recent thing, so I went to the Universitas 21 Education and Innovations Conference, and they were talking there about that it's actually quite an intimate thing to ask students to do, to reflect on their learning and what they've done well and less well and how they could improve and things, and how we can encourage students to engage with that. And one of the things someone there suggested is you as a teacher writing reflections on how the module is going from your perspective at the same time as you're expecting them to do it. So if you have, like Matt Bridge runs this professional practice module in SportEx, as they're having their practice, he could be writing, I ran this session with the students, they seem to really engage very well with that part of it, but I'm not sure that part worked quite so well. I need to think about how I can stay on time, and share those with the students so that you're opening up your vulnerabilities and your learning through the same process. This diary of an essay sort of links back to the learning archive thing. And again, I've had a few people express interest in doing it. It's one I want to play with, is getting students to both write an essay and to write a diary of how they wrote that essay at the same time and submit both parts, so that you see how they go from the question to the final submission. Very much with the emphasis that the best marks won't be for the one that says, well, as soon as it was set, I spent some time brainstorming and then I planned my time out perfectly and I did this, That actually, as long as you were honest and reflective on what you'd done, you could get a very good mark for saying, I realised with a week to go that I still hadn't done this, but thinking through How did they work to understand the question? What search terms did they use when they were searching the literature? Where did they look? How many of them did they actually access? How did they pick out which bits they were going to include? What structure? How did they start planning their structure? How did they change that over time? And again, I think it would get students to start that kind of metacognitive process of thinking about how they're thinking about how they're learning. But also, again, if you can encourage them to share them, it might help some of the students who have that bit more of a fixed mindset that I'm just not that good at this and she's really good at it, to see, actually, maybe the reason that he's getting that mark is because all this steps of process that they're doing that actually I'm not leaving the time or whatever to do. Peer feedback, so getting students to engage in their own learning. Geese do this on their field trips, so they have immediate feedback from each other. They train them how to do it, and then they get immediate feedback from each other through the field trip. And it's a way of providing really quick formative feedback, but it also gets the students engaging with real mark schemes as well. So they're really getting to evaluate others' learning, and in doing so, learning to evaluate their own learning. A tool that I found really useful for this, I find students hate giving like positives and negatives things to do, but they actually quite like this. So it's getting them to write down, read somebody else's work, write down what excites you about it, what worries you about it. Worry seems to work better than what are your criticisms of it, because they always feel like they don't want to be nasty to each other. What worries, what more do you need to know, so what's missing, and suggestions for moving forward. And the students seem to engage with this quite well. Seen exams. So again, some people think, oh no, we definitely can't do this, but it is actually already happening across campus in a number of places. So telling the students either what the topic is and giving them a few key references that will be crucial for it, or actually giving them the titles in advance so they have time to plan those out before they do it. And here they have peer marking elements to this in advance, so they know the sorts of things that they're doing. And it takes away some of that pressure that all they need to do is memorize, I've just got to memorize 50 references, and as long as I know all of those, I'll be fine, and get them actually thinking about how they can best argue the case. This links back to the civic engagement stuff, so getting students to produce briefing papers on a particular thing. So typically out there, these are written by experts for ministers or executives or whatever, and they'll be about a particular topic. And they have to summarise the background, issues of concern, and you can get students to either do this from I think you should do this, advocating for a particular position, or from the point of view of, if you make these choices, you could do this, and this is the likely outcome, this is what's most likely to happen. If you do this, these are the likely outcomes. So you could see lots of situations where you could either get a real organisation in, or you could choose something from the news, where you get the students to think about how what they're learning can impact on all of those. And I'm particularly interested in exploring how this can be done in subjects that are more traditionally theoretical subjects, I guess. These are very clear how you could do this in social policy or whatever, for example, and it's happening in those sorts of areas already. I'm very interested in how it can be done in areas that are usually considered to be more purely theoretical. So I'm working with people in theology at the moment. We're thinking about ways that it can be applied, even subjects like English, for example, thinking about what you're learning about how people's understanding of communication, understanding of relationships can influence how we could change people's behaviour in the future. So thinking around lots of different disciplines and how they can feed into these sorts of papers could be interesting. Getting students to think about learning materials for each other. So getting third years to design learning materials that will help the first years learn something that they're now learning at a more advanced level. And again, these can be online learning materials. It plays to the students' strengths, helps them to understand. Often when you're having to explain something in a more basic way, it uncovers fundamental misunderstandings that you have when you think you've got a higher level. And again, it creates this sort of community of practice. I know I think it's English, they have modules where the second years are doing an editing module. The first and third years can enter a competition where they submit pieces of work, and the second years give feedback as part of their editing module. So it encourages this sort of across the years learning, and you could see getting students to develop a Canvas resource on a particular topic, for example, and that could be their assessment, and then you can use them in your first year modules, for example. With all of these, Getting students to work in groups can be an important component of it, and it's something we're often a bit scared of. We know in NSS, for example, people often moan about this. They think that it's not fair because they did all the work and this other person didn't do any work, and why haven't you fixed this for me? And there are lots of different ways you can deal with that. Partly you can say, you all get a shared mark. Learning to make sure everybody pulls their weight is part of the learning process. We typically only do that where it's worth a smaller percentage in first year work. But one of the things that one of my colleagues, Jane Cumming, did, she published a paper demonstrating that if you give students workshops where you actually talk about working effectively as a group, get them to plan some of their strategies in advance, then they actually tend to prefer it and tend to work better as groups. You can do lucky dip presentations. I've only done this formatively so far because I've chickened out. But what you do basically is you get a group of students, 5 sections to a presentation. Tell them they've got to present 1 section each, but tell them in advance that they're not going to know which one section they're presenting until they arrive on the day and you draw lots. And what it means is they can't just, you go off and sort the introduction, you go off and sort the method, we'll meet on the day, glue our PowerPoints together. They have to rehearse each other. They have to check each other's PowerPoints. They learn to edit, they learn to skill. Also thinking there's ways through Canvas that people can give, supervisors can give comments on people's contributions, students can decide either to divide marks out between them, or my preference there is to get them to modify marks. So if everyone contributes well, everyone gets the mark that you're given. Anyone who didn't, you can opt to give 1 mark less or 2 marks less, for example. The problem with the divide it up, you've got this many marks, I'm going to divide it between you, is that it encourages people to take over. You get your best marks by taking over. So in conclusion, that's sort of a whole load of, you could do this. But the take home really, if you remember nothing else from this, is when you're thinking about your modules, and I'm aware that we're in a climate at the moment where it's quite difficult to change things, but to change things in optional modules initially, and then as you get through to broader curriculum reviews, to think about what you want your students to be able to do at the end and what you want them to spend their time doing, and pick the assessments to ensure that they spend their time doing that, and using technology to ensure that they're developing a wide variety of skills at the same time.
Hello, everyone. There's a few familiar faces in the room, and there's a few people I haven't met yet. So apologies, though, those who have met me a few times. I'll try and make sure there's some fresh content in here somehow. There's a range of slides. Graham, what you asked me to talk about, I think, was some reflections on a digital-first approach to course design and what I've been up to. I've been at the university a couple of years, so let's start with the job title, because actually it's not just you, Graham. So this is a brand new role in the university, so it's a university-wide role. I've been here 2 years, no one was doing it before, so I'm kind of making it up as I go, if I'm completely honest. The job title was made up before I arrived, Director of Educational Enterprise. I've pretty much concluded 2 years in that there were 2 things they wanted me to do. At least I hope so, because that's what I'm doing anyway. And the first one is really about trying to drive the expansion of the University of Birmingham beyond the campus. So how do we extend the reach of the University of Birmingham education beyond the physical campus of Birmingham? And clearly we've been doing that for a number of years, but there is an absolute recognition that actually our physical capacity here is a limitation to how many students we can accommodate, and clearly from an increasing point of view from a visa restrictions perspective as well. So how do we open up the University of Birmingham education for more people, and how do we go about doing that? And clearly online education and the availability of online education is part of that. Not necessarily exclusively, and I'm also involved in looking at opportunities to work with partners and campuses abroad too. The other aspect of what I'm doing then is working with you guys really, in terms of trying to understand how we take the learnings from how online delivery of programs has worked and is working, and feed that back into the campus side of things, so that effectively we're learning from each other, perhaps more so than we had done before across the different colleges, and clearly the creation of the TEL Hub, from my perspective, was an important part of that. So that's it. That's kind of my field of what I was asked to do from the university was, how can we expand our portfolio of online courses, and how do we make sure that we're then kind of feeding back those learnings throughout everything that we're doing within the University of Birmingham to enrich the experience for all of our students. And I think it is important because, as Graham said and as we've alluded to, I think that it's more of a mixed model, whereas maybe a number of years ago, online delivery and face-to-face delivery were quite distinct and separate. I think now actually every one of our students interacts with us in an online capacity one way or another, and will increasingly expect to do that. So that's, there you go, there's an explanation of the job title. Nice and simple, as it says on the tin, not so much. The other thing, and again, I've been here a couple of years, so apologies, but I always feel it is important that I explain I'm not from a HE background. I've been here 2 years now. I've been learning a lot. Every time I work with people across the university, there is more that's feeding in. But actually, my experience was I spent 15 years at the BBC doing lots of really cool digital projects at the BBC. We talked about the word digital kind of like infiltrating daily life. I was certainly there for the digital kind of explosion that happened at the BBC. And I kind of explained that so that people understand where I'm coming from. So first of all, I kind of said, there is no way I'm claiming to be an expert when it comes to online learning, and there's no way I'm an expert when it comes to education. But I have got many years of experience of working with digital products and trying to help people, audiences, consumers, kind of, I guess, access content in new ways, but also allow content makers, I'm talking TV and radio here, allow content makers to access audiences in different ways too. And I think that's really important. I hope that's come across so far in the presentations that we've done today, and hopefully as I go through. The next slide needs a bit of explanation. It's a bit of a tangent, I apologise, and it's a bit of an anecdote. But being there at the BBC for the digital explosion, suddenly everyone wanted their own website. Whether you were a content producer, a presenter, a TV maker, a radio producer, everyone suddenly wanted their own website. And the reality was there were more people who wanted websites than we had people who knew what to do with, knew how to create those websites. So effectively we kind of got overwhelmed, and the reality was we were getting people who were kind of announcing to the world that effectively we were doing this fancy new website in partnership with lots of different people, and big launch parties were set up, and no one had actually asked the question, how do we do it? Do we know how to do it? Have we ever done it before? Do we know how it's going to work? And we found that was problematic. So there was an element of the reputational risk of saying we were going to do something but not necessarily have put all the groundwork in place in order to do it. The other problem was because we had so few resources that were necessarily in place to be able to do it and do it well, the quality of what we're producing wasn't necessarily always guaranteed. And so we had to take quite a long, hard look at ourselves, and it was great. I was there. I was one of those people who kind of was there trying their best to kind of make things work. And we did that for probably from around 99, which is when BBC Online launched, all the way through to kind of like around 2005, 2006. It was a fun place to be. It was kind of very much a thousand flowers bloom, and everyone could kind of like, if you knew how to code a website, you could probably publish it on BBC Online. And it was only when we got a lot of criticism from people about the breadth and the depth of our websites that we kind of took a long, hard look at ourselves, and we kind of said, hang on a minute, how many websites have we got? And we lost count at 500 different websites across the BBC. And then we said, okay, how do we do this better? And is there an area that we can focus on? And we kind of said, actually, let's have a look at our media players. How many different media players have we got at the BBC? And we started counting them up, and there was an EastEnders player, a Top of the Pops player, a Weather player, a Scotland player, a Wales player, a Birmingham player, I think, at one point. We had all these different players, and every single one was done by different people in different teams, slightly differently. From an audience point of view, they weren't at all joined together. So if you wanted the weather for the West Midlands, you had to go to a completely different place to the weather for the UK. And we counted up, I think we got 80 different players, and we kind of said, maybe we could do this better. Maybe we could kind of join it all together and just make one player that has all of the BBC stuff in it. Lo and behold, that player became BBC iPlayer, and hopefully you're all familiar with it today. The slightly scary thing for me is I think the students that arrived with us on campus this September, I think, was something like 7 or 8 at the point of which we launched BBC iPlayer, which then goes back to expectations, right? So they've always known TV on demand, or at least from a very early age, known TV on demand. And that then links back to the Panopto. It might not be anything amazing that you can do with Panopto, but there is just a base level expectation that it's always there. The reason I mention this, I guess, is we kind of came up with right, we're not going to do every website that everyone throws at us. We're going to take a more kind of streamlined approach to it. And we're going to say, before we announce that we're launching something, we're going to make sure that we know how to do it first. And I kind of said, okay, so if you've got an idea of how to do something, from that first moment of the idea, we'll get the right people into the room to work on it, to work together to see how we can do it better, to see if it's feasible. Can we afford to do it in the way in which we do it? Do a bit of definition and discovery on it to say, okay, how much money are we going to need to do this, to do it well? And have we ever done it before? Because actually, if we've never done it before, we can't possibly say it's going to take us, 6 weeks to do that piece of work. Because actually, with digital, often we are still trying things out for the first time. So effectively, we kind of said, what we're going to do is we're going to set up teams that effectively will try and take little bits and blocks of work, see if they can do it, and over time, review and iterate it over a period of time. This is where a lot of the work goes, but we won't necessarily know until we're here at what point we can release something and do something differently. And only then we'll launch it, but actually recognising that, again, you don't know how people are going to interact and work and use your products. By the way, we use the word digital products, and I know consumerism and products are sometimes a nasty word within HE, but it was absolutely the word that we introduced at the BBC, where traditionally it all had been about programmes. And we said, actually, if we're going to launch something new, we can't just launch it and then walk away to the next thing, which is what often happens. So most of the teams who kind of had a schedule of websites that they're working on, they'd launch it and then they'd worry about the next one. There was absolutely a feeling that actually, if you're launching something, that's the start, really, of the product. That's where you actually see how people are interacting and using it. And the iPlayer that we launched on Christmas Day 2007. Not a great day to launch anything, by the way. We didn't get that bit right. But the iPlayer that launched on Christmas Day 2007 is very different to the iPlayer that you see and use today. And that's because we said there needs to be a team behind this that is continually evolving and iterating and looking at how people are using it so that we can come back to it and develop it. And that was the kind of philosophy that we introduced. And I think it took us many years to get there, and it's where the BBC and other kind of digital media players are now. But I think we're back there at the moment when it comes to certainly some of our kind of online courses and online developments, in that everyone has been trying their very best, but we haven't necessarily had all the resources and all the right people in place at the right time. So I guess, although it's a tangent and a bit of an anecdote, there is something to say that now you've got the Tel Hub established within COSS, the earlier that you can include Kabir and his team in terms of the ideas and the thoughts that you've got, then hopefully the better the product at the end of it, and hopefully the better the experience for everyone involved. So, back to what Graham actually asked me to talk about, I guess, which again is kind of me saying that one of the buzzwords that was certainly I found put around me when I first got here at the university was the word alternative modes of delivery. So I was working very closely with Glyn Watson, Director of Alternative Modes of Delivery, before he got his new job at the business school. And for a while I was asked to do an alternative modes of delivery strategy, and then I kind of scratched my head and thought, why is it alternative? Surely this is just actually about advancing our experience and our what we're trying to offer to students. The fact that some of it might be face-to-face and some of it may be online actually is an alternative. We just need to think about how we're going to deliver the best possible experience to our students. And clearly, if you know your student is going to be with you face-to-face, there are certain things you can do with them. And if you know a student's online, there's certain things you might not be able to do with them. But ultimately, we should be using technology for the better of everyone. And we should be thinking about the contextual opportunities that are available, depending on where students are. So I think increasingly we'll see more and more of what we're developing as a university in the middle space, where effectively it is a blend between face-to-face delivery and online delivery. The only thing I'd add to that is that, and this is where I guess the terminology digital first has started to kind of be used, which is, If you start off with a face-to-face program, then you've got to completely reinvent it to do it online. If you start off thinking about an online program, the face-to-face experience is only ever going to be better, in my opinion, in as much as you've then got the digital assets, you've got the materials to then use with your face-to-face students. So when I'm kind of talking about thinking about digital first, I'm kind of thinking, well, challenge yourself. How could this work in an online environment? It's not to say that everything we do should be online, and that's absolutely not what I'm saying, but I'm just saying let's challenge ourselves just to think how we might do this in an online environment, which might force ourselves to think differently about how we might do it in a face-to-face. And as you can see across all of those modes, really, really important that we've got the right support in place. So that's why I've kind of underlined that with the availability of the TEL Hub, Kabir and the team, Trevor, working centrally as well when it comes to Canvas, but also making sure that there is the right training and support available for people. So that's kind of my high-level view of kind of like how I think as an institution we can really think about things slightly different and hopefully kind of lead the way for learning, design and delivery within the UK. One of the challenges that were, I guess, put in place for me when I arrived in role was that we had decided that actually, although we had been doing some online courses for a number of years within the university, we also recognised that other people out there were doing it. And there may be an opportunity for us to learn from others. And that actually the amount of investment required to do it well would be something that the university wasn't necessarily ready to put in all of that risk up front. And so they said, okay, let's see if there is anyone out in the market that's willing to share that risk with us, who has already got some experience of doing that, who can help us do things differently. So I think week one of arriving at the university, I was handed a half-finished contract with Wiley, asked to kind of get it signed in the first couple of weeks and then deliver 3 fully online programs in partnership with CoSS, 2 in the business school, an MBA and MSc International Business, and 1 within INLGA, the Institute of Local Government. So the next set of slides, although Graham's got up, does that mean I've got no time left? I wondered if that was a hint. My next set of slides really is just some reflections on designing and delivering fully online master's degree in partnership with Wiley and the business school, but also kind of talking more broadly to other colleges and people who've got experience in this space. And I've kind of covered, broke it down into 4 areas of consideration. One around content and structure, one around delivery, one around assessment, although Vicky, there's no way I can live up to your slides, so I'll probably just kind of skip that one. And a bit about feedback. And I feel that I kind of do quite a lot of myth busting around the university. Sometimes at quite a senior level. One of those is that online courses are free or easy to make, or they just happen naturally. It could not be any further than the truth. Actually, online courses, I think if you're doing them properly, probably cost a lot more to make initially. There may be money that you can make longer term, but in terms of the amount of effort and thinking about it, then they're not necessarily going to make you rich quick. And actually, there's an awful lot of upfront thought that needs to go into the course design. So the reason I did show you that slide around my experiences of the BBC and that process, because actually those who are working with me on course design know that actually we're trying to front load a lot of the thought and the effort upfront. So we don't just go off and say, right, we're going to make that now and we're going to launch that. We're instead trying to think about, okay, what is the structure of the course? What's the content available, and how are we going to make this work? And I guess it's always difficult because you guys have got plenty of hands-on working knowledge of delivering programs face-to-face, and some of you online as well. But just things about pace and progression. So online students, don't have that regular contact and FaceTime with you. They don't necessarily have the standard timetable. So you have to think about how you're going to recreate that for them. How are you going to pace and progress the course? What are the different gates that students need to kind of go through in order to kind of feel that they're achieving something online? So the Wiley programs that we've launched are blocked up in 10 credit modules. Each of those 10 credit modules are taught over 8 weeks. Each of those 8 weeks has got self-contained assessment, so that effectively they're kind of like self-contained units of content. although available, most of it available from day one, is kind of chunked into different weeks with different, small assessments gradually kind of like increasing over the time, just so that effectively students know what they're meant to have achieved by when, so that effectively they feel that there is some kind of markers there in order for them to feel a sense of achievement. Also trying to get that balance between how much of it is self-paced, how much of it is synchronous, how much of it is group work, and how is that going to work. Clearly, whenever we talk about digital, everyone also immediately assumes video. It's not just video, of course, it is about the whole suite of different resources that you can make available to people. So yes, videos, but not whole hour-long lecture captures. This is about thinking about the key learning objectives and chunking it up into the different component parts that we think are most suitable to be delivered via video, accompanied by appropriate reading material, thinking about how much of that is actually going to be embedded, how much of it they're expected to go and research themselves. Slideshows, infographics, really high quality infographics, but also mixing that with low fidelity. When is it appropriate to invest money in high quality graphics? When does it make more sense to make them more fluid? And then you've got the interactive voting and activities that you can include. The next few I put on there because, again, they're things that people tend to put on as afterthoughts. Accessibility considerations. It's far, far easier and cheaper to think about accessibility at the start of doing something than it is pigeonholing it on at the end. Whether or not that's kind of making sure all your videos have got subtitles, making sure that screen readers work with your content, absolutely crucial for students. I'm getting some nods. They don't. Access to external learning resources as well. If you've got global students, they're not going to be able to just pop to the library. Is the content that you are expecting them to be able to access available to them wherever they're trying to access? And if not, how can we enable it to be accessed to them in an appropriate fashion, an appropriate time? I've come up against a couple of times on these courses the institutional library buying, where effectively we tend to buy a few copies of a book for campus-based students and let them fight it out in the library for availability. I think online people expect things to just be available when they want it. That comes with different costs. If we're going to assume that the books are going to be available at the point of which students want it, instead of 5 institutional library copies, we probably need to have enough for the whole cohort to get access to it. So the economics of online delivery is quite different. And also, are there any accreditation requirements that you either want to that you need to align to now or need to think about in the future? I think one of the great things that we managed to achieve with the business school program, the MBA, was AMBER, the Association of MBAs. We were very keen to get AMBER accreditation as part of the marketing for the program. And there was a real belief that in order to do that, there had to be a residential component of it. And residential parts of online courses, great selling points, but if they're compulsory, they can be a bit of a turn-off as well, because not every student can necessarily afford or give up the availability to go on a residential. So actually, not kind of resting on that. No one else had managed to achieve a fully online AMBER accredited MBA without a residential component. So we said, maybe we'll talk to AMBER, see if they fancy doing something different. And lo and behold, they recognised they needed to change too. So the Birmingham Online MBA is the world's first AMBER accredited fully online MBA, which I think is a great achievement, and hats off to the business school team that managed to achieve that. Delivery. So that's kind of like thinking about it up front and the development and the different types of things to think about with development. But of course, there's the delivery side of it as well. And that's the crucial point. So, and you can't think about the development without the deliver and vice versa. What's the appropriate learning environment? Some subjects, maybe you can't do it without some kind of physical environment. But what can be achieved within the virtual environment? But crucially, what is the staff resource required as well? Again, and I guess the idea of everything just being available when people want it online comes with expectations about them. Well, we'll just put the content online and let students go there. How are you going to make sure that actually students have got access to the appropriate stuff when need it, when they need it? How are we going to manage the kind of marking and assessment? How are we going to manage the kind of seminars and the tutorials that are all possible completely possible using webinar tools. The programs that we've developed all have webinar components of it. The MBA has compulsory fortnightly hour-and-a-half sessions, which we use Adobe Connect for. It's all possible, but what's the appropriate ratio for students? You know, how many students can you have in a webinar before actually it just becomes a really kind of like one-to-many experience? We don't, you know, that isn't always appropriate. And actually one of the beauty of online webinars is that it can be two-way and interactive, but actually, you know, if you've got more than 25 students, is it possible to make it truly interactive? And then of course, and to be fair, this is one area that I just don't think we've really kind of touched at all yet as a university, has been thinking about how we can use analytics to monitor and support student progression, not necessarily in a big brother kind of way, but how do we help them help themselves by understanding their progression through the material from all of the data that is there available to us, theoretically available to us, but how do we make that available to students so that they themselves can understand their own progress? Of course, that all comes with just thinking about how you support it. So what are appropriate methods of communication? What is appropriate? You know, we're not necessarily expecting staff and tutors to be available 24/7, even though students might expect it. So just being clear with students when they can expect that kind of support and what to expect out of hours. And actually, if there are IT issues, if there are support issues and things that absolutely need to be support, for example, our webinars on a Saturday, what mechanisms are in place to help out should they fall over? I think this is all part of the considerations that we, as a university, if we truly want to be global and truly want to embrace digital, need to think about institutionally. So we can't solve everything in this room today, but we can certainly start making people think about it so that collectively as an institution we move forward with it. Assessment, I can't really, but really just thinking about that appropriate balance of formative and summative assessment, how it's going to work and to what extent, you know, the exams versus the kind of MCQs versus group work and assessment, and just finding the right thing. And clearly video submission's important too. I've mentioned accreditation and resources required. It's all right, I'm just looking at time and aware we want a bit of time at the end for Q&A. And then feedback, and it's interesting the CMA came up earlier. You know, how do we make our courses so that we are able to respond to feedback from students in a timely fashion that means that actually it's worth students feeding back? Because I think often when they feed back, they kind of think, well, will it actually make any difference to me? And I guess I'm just getting out a personal gripe at the moment in terms of some of the institutional ways in which we tend to do MEQs at the moment, and just making sure that actually we are inviting students. And I don't know the answer to this. If anyone does know the answer, great. Trying to understand the difference between, you know, if we've got an online student and they're interacting with us through our online services, Canvas being a core component, but lots of other ones too. How do we differentiate feedback from students about that experience from the experience of the educational experience, from the experience of their assessment? They're different things. At the moment, we kind of bundle it all up into one. And actually, if we want to create really great learning experiences, we probably need to disaggregate some of that feedback so that we can use it appropriately. Of course, that then links into, you know, expectations of students around, you know, tutor turnaround times of feedback and assessment, and also to what extent peer assessment can be used. But I absolutely do think it's important that it's a two-way process and not just feeling that it's a one-way process. So that's kind of my, that's just some kind of initial observations. Like I say, I don't claim to be an expert. What I really hope to do is to make sure that we're kind of having the right conversations with the right people to kind of feed in and not continually do everything separately. So if anyone does want to have any further conversations with me, very, very welcome. The other end of the spectrum that I'm involved in, and actually when I first got the role here at the university, everyone assumed that I was all about MOOCs. Truth is actually, I've only recently inherited MOOCs. And I know Tom's done a MOOC within the Jubilee Centre. Anyone else done a MOOC here? CoSS has done 2 MOOCs. There you go. Just very quickly, this is some headlines. So actually for MOOCs, we don't use Canvas at all. We use FutureLearn, so the platform that we deliver our MOOCs on is a very different platform to what we do with our campus-based students. What's interesting, I guess, with FutureLearn is, unlike Canvas, which is a virtual learning environment, which I guess its fundamental mission is to support campus-based face-to-face students. So it started life like most VLEs as effectively a document repository. Where do I go to get the support information? When you're delivering online learning, actually it's not your support vehicle, it's your delivery vehicle. It is your campus, it is your lecture theatre. And it will be interesting to see how over time these technologies adapt from being support vehicles to delivery vehicles. And arguably Future Learn as a platform was always intended as an online delivery vehicle. It can't do half as much as what Canvas can do, but it did always start life as being thinking about learning delivery. So it'll be interesting to anyone who's done both to compare and contrast the kind of experience that they feel they've been able to give to students on Future Learn with the experience they're able to give to Canvas. To date, we've done 18 courses across 52 runs. That's also kind of like saying, actually, we make courses, but then we don't just retire them. The intention is that once we've invested, because that's the really expensive bit in the course, that we do it a few times. Over 3,000 registrations to date. Over half of those registrations have turned into learners. So interestingly, with MOOCs that are very, very kind of like light touch in terms of any kind of support and tutoring, you know, there's a 50% drop-off rate. Whereas with the fully online courses that people are paying for at the moment, we're seeing a 10% drop-off over the year. So different and different methodologies in the way in which people are learning. But actually, out of those, it's still quite a large number of people that have ultimately done this free course and still at the end of it said, actually, I want to get a certificate now to prove I've done it. So actually 2,500 people who've done our MOOCs have actually then said, I want a certificate to prove that I've done it. And that's pretty much all it does, but they're willing to pay for it. It won't necessarily cover, well, it will never, I don't think, cover the cost of making a MOOC, but it's still large numbers. So although the dropout rates are quite significant, they are large numbers. How does all this fit together? So MOOCs one end of the spectrum that are free, paid for master's courses that are quite expensive on the other end of the spectrum. I guess my philosophy is actually you can make this all work together in that if you think about where we're investing, effectively we're investing in modules of content in digital assets. And actually at the very top, that is a visual representation of one of, for example, the online MBA, like I said, taught in blocks of 8-week modules. Each one of those modules 10 credits, self-contained. Each one of those modules potentially could be sold as CPD in its own right. If you create the module from, or at least you think about that from the start, could potentially, this is wrong now, isn't it? It's now widening horizons modules. But certainly can be used for blended, and actually we've got some examples now where in Les they are using they're actually giving their campus-based students one of the business score online modules as a blended option as part of that course. So we're now starting to see some of that cross-population of content from not only different schools but different colleges too. And then each one of those modules actually, which are lessons, start becoming more MOOC-like actually. And so rather than necessarily having to reinvent the wheel and do lots of things separately, by thinking about these different components at the point of which you're developing and designing your program, means that actually there is no reason why we can't offer a taster MOOC relatively cheaply because it's using some of the content that we've developed as part of the wider program.